Hey everyone, when you think of the American West, a pretty specific set of images probably pops into your head. But what if I told you that classic vision was less about what actually happened and more about a brilliantly staged production? All right, let's get into it and deconstruct how the myth of the American West was really invented. So where did this all come from, really? You've got the lone cowboy, the daring outlaw, the dramatic shootouts. These things feel so real, so much a part of the landscape itself. But here's the thing. They were carefully crafted and then sold to a public that was just hungry for this exact kind of story. So the real question is, who was writing the script? Yeah, these images right here, these are the building blocks of the whole myth, right? They're just so deeply burned into our culture. But what's so important to get is that these weren't just random snapshots of history. Nope. They were key elements of a story that started taking shape right after the Civil War. A story that romanticized, simplified, and ultimately mythologized a much, much more complex reality. And the first place this whole myth-making machine got fired up wasn't out on some dusty trail, but on the printed page. This is where those classic characters of the West were first hammered into the legends we all know today. Okay, so starting way back in the 1860s, America was just devouring these things called dime novels. They were cheap, they were everywhere, and they were absolutely thrilling. And their main trick? Well, they'd take the lives of real people and just embellish them, turning everyday folks into these massive, larger-than-life figures of folklore. And honestly, there's no better example of this whole transformation than Calamity Jane. She was a real person, for sure, but the character that emerged from the pages of those novels, wow, that was something else entirely, a full-blown legend in the making. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, right? You see the gap between the real person and the legend. The real Martha Jane Canary was a professional scout, which, let's be honest, is an incredible life all on its own. But the dime novels took that real foundation and just built this romanticized icon on top of it, making her a central character and a version of the West that generations would grow up believing was 100% true. And then this guy comes along, Owen Wister. And with his novels, especially The Virginian, he didn't just tell a story. Man, he created an icon. This quote nails it perfectly. He basically codified the cowboy personality, tough, quiet, but with a secret heroic heart. This right here, this is the template, the DNA, for pretty much every movie cowboy that came after. Okay, so the myth starts on the page, right? But pretty soon it just leaps off the page and into the real world. Let's shift gears and see how the actual skills of the West were turned from these practical contests into a massive national spectacle. The rodeo didn't start in some giant stadium with flashing lights and cheering crowds. It was way simpler than that. Think about it. It was just cowboys at the end of a long, hard cattle drive, maybe settling a bet or just showing off their skills in roping and riding. It was practical, it was casual, and it was the real deal. And this timeline, it just lays out the evolution perfectly. We go from this one-off event in Pecos, Texas in 1883, literally just to settle a fight between two ranches, to a national phenomenon by the early 1900s, with dedicated circuits and everything. And here's a really important piece of the story. Women were actually super popular and successful competitors until around 1916, when their role in the sport was cut way back, which really changed the face of the competition. But okay, if the dime novels wrote the scripts and the rodeos brought the action, there was one guy who took all of it, put it on this massive stage, and sold it to the entire world. Let's talk about the ultimate showman, Buffalo Bill Cody. Cody's genius, really, was that he was an incredible marketer. He looked at all these stock characters, the cowboy, the Indian, the sharpshooter, and he realized, hey, I can package all of this together into one giant traveling show. He wasn't just showing off skills. He was selling a complete story. And he was so smart about it. Look at this. He insisted on calling his production Buffalo Bill's Wild West. He hated the word show. And why? Well, because show sounds fake, right? But Wild West? That sounds like you're getting the real, authentic deal. He even hired real cowboys and Native Americans just to hammer home that feeling of authenticity. It was an absolute masterstroke of branding. But he wasn't the only game in town. His only real competition in this huge new entertainment industry was a guy named Gordon Lilly, who everyone knew as Pawnee Bill. For years, these two guys were basically the titans of the Wild West entertainment business, running these rival productions all over the country. So what happens when you can't beat your biggest competitor? Well, you join them. In 1908, in what would be like a huge Hollywood merger today, the two bills combined their shows to create something the world had literally never seen before. And just look at the sheer scale of this thing. The Two Bill show was, it was an absolute spectacle. It wasn't just an American West show anymore. This thing went global. You had Russian Cossacks and Japanese acrobats performing right alongside American cowboys. It was a true worldwide phenomenon. And a huge, huge part of the appeal was the incredible women who performed in these shows. Cody brought in huge stars like Annie Oakley, Little Sure Shot, who could pull off these unbelievable feats. But even as these women were totally challenging the gender norms of the day with their skill and their daring, they were also really careful to maintain a feminine look, often wearing corsets and full skirts to kind of head off any criticism at the pass. So, okay, we've seen how the myth was built, piece by piece, on the page and on the stage. But this brings us to the biggest, most important question of all. Why? Why did this specific myth become so powerful and last for so long? Seriously, let's dig into this. What was it about this romanticized, kind of cleaned up version of the frontier that just hit a nerve with the American public right at that specific moment in history? And this right here, this is the key. As America was shifting, becoming more industrial, you had more and more people living in cities, working in factories, sitting in offices. And this real anxiety started to build that modern life was making people, especially men, soft and over-civilized. The myth of the rugged, tough-as-nails cowboy, man, that was the perfect cure for that fear. And this idea, it was perfectly summed up by none other than Theodore Roosevelt, with his whole concept of the strenuous life. Roosevelt himself was pushing this ideal of rugged, aggressive masculinity as the cure for all the problems of modern city living. The mythical West gave everyone the perfect hero for this new way of thinking, a symbol of the very strength America was afraid it was losing. And that pull, it's never really left us, has it? From those cheap dime novels to Buffalo Bill's incredible shows, all the way to the Hollywood movies that came later, this whole constructed romance of the West became a foundational American story. A story that, as this quote says, continues to pull at us and continues to shape how America sees itself, even today.